So guess what, everybody? This is what I said about school closures. The New York Times has finally caught up with me. This is what I've been saying about school closures since late 21. As soon as I got vaccine injured, I looked into COVID, and I found out they were lying about everything. They're lying about masks. They're lying about the virus. They're lying about who funded it, who invented it, where it came from. They lied about transmission, contraction. They lied about herd immunity, natural immunity. They lied about early treatments. They lied about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. There wasn't a thing they didn't lie about. And so we found out very early on that it was bad to lock schools down. And here's what I said about it. So, by the way, the reason I'm showing you this is because the New York Times just put out an article that now agrees with me from almost, 2 or 3 years ago.
Where did you find out about it at that time?
I'll tell you in a second.
Okay.
There's a big debate about whether they should open the schools because of COVID and because Omicron is so much more contagious. Omicron, the symptoms of Omicron are very mild, and they're like a cold. And a lot of people are saying that's good because that signals the end of the pandemic, because now we're going to become endemic, and now it will just circulate, and the symptoms that it will present with are those of a cold. Even though it's not, it's the Omicron cold. So everybody's shitting their pants about kids having to go to school are just repeating propaganda from big pharma-funded establishment news. Congratulations. Do you know the damage that is done to kids not being socialized in schools? We don't even know. But it's great. We know now. Yeah, and the Chicago Public Schools Teacher Union are so fear-mongered, they just voted to end in-person school. That was a mistake. They are at a higher risk of contracting the Omicron cold. Yes. Yeah. They are at a less risk for severe disease. So what you're saying is we're using the word risk now to describe the symptoms of a cold. So kids are at greater risk of catching something that will present as a cold.
Top 5 Zoe reported symptoms. So this
is where I got my information from.
This is the early London data, right? Most common, runny nose. Second most common, headache. Third most common, fatigue. Sometimes the fatigue was bad, sometimes it was mild. Fourth most common feature, sneezing. Fifth most common feature, sore throat. The implication is obvious. If you have any of these and you've had colds in the past, you're going to think it's a cold, but it may well not be. It may be an Omicron cold. Need to get tested.
So there you have it. That's what people are locking down to avoid that. They think it's to avoid something more deadly. They're misinformed. Why? Because they're getting their information from the establishment. I'll tell you what I think. We should keep them open and kids should be going to schools. So, turns out the teachers were at a greater risk of getting pregnant from one of their students than contracting. So here was a friend of the show, Jennifer Say. She lost her job at Levi's over telling the truth about schools, lockdowns, and COVID. Remember. She said it took the New York Times 4 years to write this. The longer schools were closed, the more kids fell behind. The most vulnerable kids were harmed the most. School closures did nothing to slow the spread. The New York Times contributed significantly to prolonging the closures with their reporting. They are implicated, though I see no apology. There is no apology yet from the New York Times. Anyone with a brain knew all of this from day one because it was obvious. We knew it here at this show. And the New York Times cannot afford to apologize, Kurt, because that would be a domino effect, and people would expect them to apologize for everything else that they've gotten wrong, and the list is longer than the movie Napoleon. I woke up today still running that movie.
Just find a scapegoat. That's what they traditionally do. You got your Jason Blairs, you got your Judith Millers, right?
So here's the story. I'll show you a little bit of it.
Look at
the headline, the New York Times, the upshot. What the data says about pandemic school closures 4 years later. Guess what? The data said that 4 years ago.
Yeah,
but nobody looked at the data. So the people who said they were following the science never were following the science. You know who was actually following the science? People at the Jimmy Dore show.
Oh, what are you, a scientist?
People at the Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal. That's as far as I can tell. Russell Brand. I wasn't watching the show back then.
I remember the anger. I remember a little. This is when I was first on the show, so it was a little bit at you, but the anger at people in general who would just say the things that you said was so over the top, and some of it was people that they weren't angry, but they just couldn't believe.
They didn't want to believe.
I ask everybody now. I go, "Do you have your 10 shots?"
So here it says. By the way, look, it took 3.
Look at that.
It took 3 women with headshots to figure the shit that we knew 4 years ago. Sarah Mervush, Charlie Chaplin, Claire Kane Miller, and Francesca Paris.
Francesca Paris. Finally came around. Great work, gals. It says 3 clumped your heads together.
The more time students spent in remote instruction, the further they fell behind. And experts say extended closures did little to stop the spread.
How did they hear about this hot lead, I wonder?
So, and the real tragedy is our students missed out on 4 years of transgendered strippers reading stories to them while twerking in the classrooms.
Oh, well, mother taught us that at home.
Beyond that, they missed out on socialization, any skills that don't involve an iPad. And they're now better friends with AI than they are with their neighborhood kids.
That's been coming for a while, Jimmy.
So here's some of the article. 4 years ago this month, schools nationwide began to shut down, igniting one of the most polarizing and partisan debates of the pandemic. Some schools, often in Republican-led states and rural areas, reopened by the fall of 2020. Others, typically in large cities and states led by Democrats, would not fully reopen for another year.
I know why.
Today there is what?
Because their crazy rich donor constituents were all into not opening for a year, even though the private schools were open.
You can watch. There's a real solid nugget of information coming that I didn't send you.
Oh.
Today, there is broad acknowledgement among many public health and education. By the way, I was pilloried, and I'm going to show you that at the end of this, how I was pilloried for being right about this. I've been pilloried for being right about the vaccine, about COVID, about lockdowns, about transmission, about contraction, about school lockdowns, about the origin of the virus. I've been herd immunity, natural immunity, ivermectin. I've been pilloried by people who've known me my entire life, people who've known me for 30 years in comedy, people who hate me, obviously, with MSNBC contracts, the Young Turks, every other asshole with a YouTube show, except the Gray Zone.
You know, Jimmy,
every one of them. Kyle Kalinske, every one of those fucking morons
even
who
Blondie?
repeated even Blondie, even Barbie Ken.
Even Beach Ken?
Beach Ken. Today, there is broad acknowledgement among many public health and education experts that extended school closures did not, repeating, it's in red, did not significantly stop the spread of COVID, while the academic harms for children have been large and long-lasting.
What rich person's kids got developmentally disabled from this?
Well,
besides that one from the New York.
All I can say is that school closures did slow the spread of knowledge and social skills.
You got to admit we never said we'd stop it altogether. We just said we'd slow the spread.
And all we're doing now is bringing a generation of irrationally angry and violent know-nothing Michael Rappaports.
Oh, you think they're going to be as social as Michael Rappaport? No, they will not.
It's like a zombie apocalypse in slow motion. By the way, if that Michael Rappaport turns any more red, he can stop traffic at intersections. I'll tell you that. But the combination, poverty and remote learning, was particularly harmful. So who did it hurt? It hurt the poorest kids the most. I'm going to hurt the poor. So for each week spent remote, students in poor districts experienced steeper losses in math than peers in richer districts. That is notable because poor districts were also more likely to stay remote for longer.
Oh, thank God.
Some of the country's largest poor districts are in Democratic-leaning cities that took a more cautious, that's not cautious. What they did was reckless. It didn't follow the science. That wasn't
vicious.
That would say vicious. They weren't being cautious.
You told them to fuck themselves. Basically.
Cautious would mean that you would have protected someone from harm. You did the exact opposite. It's almost as if they're training people to live in 15-minute cities in their own heads.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I wonder why Biden is hemorrhaging support from black and brown voters. I wonder. Perhaps the biggest question that hung over school reopenings, was it safe?
Is that still a question?
Well, the data always showed it was safe, especially from Sweden that never did anything. They didn't mask their kids. They didn't lock down anything. They didn't close their schools.
This story is in the upshot section, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say it's safe because if it hadn't been, it'd be in the big boy news part of the paper, right?
That was largely, it says that was largely unknown. If it was safe, was largely.
That's true. That's a fact.
Largely unknown in the spring of 2020 when schools first shut down.
Yeah.
But we learned quickly that, by the way, there was never any data to shut down schools. There was never a study that said wear a mask. There was never a study. There was never a long-term study that said the mRNA vaccine would stop. Anyway, but several experts said that had changed by the fall of 2020. When there were initial signs that children were less likely to become seriously ill. How less likely? It was almost unmeasurable.
Omicron wasn't deadly at all.
That's how low it was. For the risk of children from COVID was almost so low that you couldn't measure it. That's how low it was. For real. The only children that were at risk from I don't want to get into it because I don't want
the fake Omicron deaths.
So if you so if you have a comorbidity, if you're a kid with cancer, then yeah, maybe that.
Dr. Phil said it best, dude. Right in Whoopi's face, he said it the best.
And growing evidence from Europe and parts of the United States that opening schools with safety measures did not lead to significantly more transmission. So here we go. Infectious disease leaders have generally agreed that school closures were not an important strategy in stemming the spread of COVID. What? They were not an important, meaning they didn't do anything. School closures. Schools closed. Yeah, they did something, but they didn't stop the. They did not stem the spread of COVID.
So they were like those masks that we now know didn't work that people still wear.
Similar.
Yeah.
In the future, now get this. This is the part that kind of drove me crazy. This is in the article. In the future, infectious disease experts said they hope decisions would be guided more by epidemiological data as it emerged.
So they experimented on them.
So what they're telling you, what that paragraph says is, the school closures and lockdowns it wasn't based on epidemiological data. It wasn't based on anything. And the people who were telling you to do that, saying they were following the science, were just making it up. They weren't following the data. That's what this says. That's what that says. They were not following the data. They weren't following the science. They were making it up and fear-mongering. And I'm going to tell you in a second why the teachers' unions were for lockdowns and closures of schools. I'll tell you in a second. But that's what that tells you. And so locking down was not an important strategy in stemming the spread of COVID, but it is essential, locking down schools and making people stupid to believe anything that the network television tells you. Wait, I thought Bill Gates had some AI software that was supposed to make up for all the kids not going to school and in-person learning.
Like McNamara's morons.
I thought Crystal Ball's ex-husband's home learning software
that guy
would also help, the 40 millionaire guy.
Yeah.
And as she was advocating for locking down schools, she didn't tell people she was making money off it.
Well, did they?
That's because breaking points for you.
Sounds like the kids didn't learn shit. What sounds like to
Talk
me.
about broken points. So here's what we knew all along. That kids were safe from COVID the whole time. And that was from 2021.
That's crazy. That came out that early.
That's in the New York Magazine. NPR knew that in May of 21.
Was it in the Atlantic?
In kids, the risk of COVID-19 and the flu are similar, but the risk perception isn't.
I remember another article saying they're similar, but it's definitely worse for COVID. Do you remember that? It wasn't NPR.
No, I don't remember that. I remember them saying that the risk of COVID to children is so low, it's almost incalculable. That's another quote that I can't find. I know I have it somewhere in one of my old keynotes, but I can't find it. So according to the CDC, this was in New York Magazine in 2021. According to the CDC, among children, the mortality risk from COVID-19 is actually lower than from the flu.
I'm going to be the view.
Look,
no children died.
I'm saying that the risk of COVID was lower to children than their risk of dying from the flu.
I'm also terrified of the flu, though.
The risk of severe disease or hospitalization, about the same.
You don't understand.
So they were
germaphobe.
actually at less risk from COVID, children, than they were from the flu. Now, this is a fact. This is from the CDC. That's how factual it is. Even they'll admit it. Now, we knew that back then, and people pilloried me. And I'll show you those people in a second.
Jimmy, you don't understand. I got really fat kids.
Here we
There's
go.
a shortage of Ozempic.
This is true for the much worried over Delta variant. So not just Omicron, this was also true for everybody. Oh, Delta was worse. Remember, that's what they tried to say. Not for kids. This is true for the much worried over Delta variant. It is also true for all the other variants and for so your kid had a bigger chance of dying from Delta Airlines than they did from the Delta variant.
They had a bigger chance of dying at a drag queen story hour.
Here's more. Most remarkably, it has been known to be true since the very earliest days of the pandemic. Indeed, it was among the very first things that we did know about the disease.
What?
That it wasn't a threat to children. That's in the New York. That's from New York Magazine.
That's not what Joy Behar said.
The preliminary mortality data from China was very clear. To children, COVID-19 represented only a vanishingly tiny threat of death, hospitalization, or severe disease.
Let's inject that shit in them anyway.
And why were teacher unions for this, right? Well, the teacher union, I'm all for teacher unions.
Yeah.
The problem with teacher unions, like a lot of unions, is that the people at the head are often corrupt. Like Randy Weingarten. Randy Weingarten is one of the most corrupt union leaders in the country, and she runs the National Teacher Union.
Jimmy,
she's super corrupt and a liar, and she doesn't care about what she says she cares about.
Look, the way people talk about unions, where they go, "Oh, we don't. Unions are bad because it's like when I thought abolish the police was a stupid idea. A union's there because it's necessary because you're dealing with some big, massive company.
That's right.
So, like any other thing, like, hey, America's corrupt. Let's throw away all of America and not just get rid of the corrupt.
You try to reform it.
These are institutions you need when you need them.
That's right.
It's how it works.
So here's why teacher unions, because they were incentivized. Teacher unions were incentivized to lock down and close schools. Ready?
Corey, you say that teachers unions are substantially to blame for public schools staying closed during the pandemic. Why do you say that?
Absolutely. There are 6 rigorous studies on the topic. I did the first one with a co-author named Christos Makrides, and each of these studies found that places that had stronger teachers unions, all else equal, were substantially and statistically less likely to reopen their schools in person. And the reason for this is pretty obvious to me. I don't blame the people in the system. I blame the incentives that are baked into the system itself. Think about it. The private schools are fighting to reopen from the get-go, but you had the public school teachers unions fighting to remain closed. And the main difference there is one of incentives, that one of those sectors receives children's education dollars regardless of whether they even open their doors for business. But it was actually even worse than that with the COVID school closures, because the teachers unions started to understand that they could actually hold children's education hostage, essentially in perpetuity, to secure multiple multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from the federal government. And it actually worked out for them. This is about $190 billion in so-called COVID relief that have been allocated to K-12 education since March of 2020. That's about $3,000 to $4,000 per student, on top of what the government-run schools are already spending of about $16,000 per student per year. Most of that money hasn't even been spent yet. According to the Wall Street Journal, 93% of that funding to this day hasn't even been spent. So the public school teachers unions, I don't blame the people in the system, but they did have an incentive to keep their doors closed to secure these ransom payments. In Chicago, 2 weeks to slow the spread turned into 2 years to flatten a generation of children. You had a Chicago teachers union strike vote in 2022. They were still fear-mongering about reopening schools.
I remember
the same union had to delete a tweet.
That's when people really came at me. That's when people really came at me in early 2022, when I was telling people children are not at a risk to COVID.
What do you hate unions, Jimmy?
And that's what they said. They go, well, watch, I'll show you. So he's going to talk about this. The Chicago Teachers Union tweeted this out. The push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny.
Anytime you hear that, you know it's bullshit. That's amazing.
Now you exactly like they said the same thing about Bernie Sanders in 2016.
How would that be rooted in all three?
They were violent, misogynist, racists, and sexist. That's what they said about people who followed Bernie Sanders in 2016. They said the same thing about Donald Trump. They said the same thing about the truckers protest, which was the most extremely peaceful protest, and they were right. Turns out the Supreme Court in Canada agrees with the truckers. And this is what this is the game now. This is the game in America. Anything you don't like is white supremacist, is a racist, is sexist, is misogynist. Anything you don't like.
That's over. That's over now. I'm telling you, the game is over. This was the game then.
That's their game.
Racism in Russia is no longer a thing. People will use it. It's done. It's been done for months now.
Well, it's been tried by Cornel West on me. It's been tried by Nina Turner tried it on me. It was been tried by TYT and Anna Kasparian after she flashed her genitalia to the entire newsroom and then tried to blame it on me that she got humiliated and tried to shut me up because they were smearing anti-war journalists. So they tried to do #MeToo on me, and that blew up in their face because everybody heard the story and a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Glenn Greenwald, exposed them for trying to blackmail somebody to shut them up, because that's what TYT and Anna Kasparian did after she flashed her genitalia to the entire newsroom.
You're lucky she's not smart.
And she didn't do that just once, by the way. That was on the regular. So here's something else I said about it. Here's what the CDC says. The evidence to date suggests that staff-to-staff student and student-to-student transmission are not the primary means of exposure to SARS-CoV-2 among infected children. So if a kid gets COVID, it's not because they got it at school. That's what this says. It's not the primary means. Kids are getting COVID, if they get it, other places. Several studies have also concluded that students are not the primary sources of exposure to SARS-CoV-2 among adults in school setting. So the teachers aren't getting it from the kids. That's what that says. That says they're not the primary source. That's what that says. That's the CDF&C. So people are still shitting their pants over their kids going to school so much because they're watching Rachel Maddow and Don Lemon scaremonger them to death. So they're going to tell you, people go, wow, but the COVID is up and the hospitalizations for children with COVID is skyrocketing. Here's what Dr. Fauci says. We test anybody who's admitted to the hospital. No, this is a different guy. That's not Fauci. That's Dr. Paul Offit. This is this other doctor. He says, we test anybody who's admitted to the hospital for whatever reason to see whether or not they have COVID. And we're definitely seeing an increase in cases. However, we're really not seeing an increase in children who are hospitalized for COVID or in the intensive care unit for COVID. That's right now. So everybody's shitting their pants about kids having to go to school are just repeating propaganda from big pharma-funded establishment news. Congratulations. You think you're on the left and you're repeating propaganda from big pharma-funded establishment news. Congrats. And you're shitting on other lefties who are actually telling the truth about it. Congrats. You became Sean Hannity. Congrats. And who did that? Well, there's a little show hosted by a guy with an MSNBC contract that did that.
Do you mean literally?
Here's what they came at me.
It's literally a little show.
Here's what
it's not big.
It's literally. Well, they're on the corporate algorithm. So it says Jimmy Dore goes full psycho. Jimmy Dore cites outdated and irrelevant articles from 2020 regarding the hospitalization of children to persuade his audience that children should go back to school. The Majority Report crew, somewhat in disbelief, discusses how Dore talks about the Chicago Teachers Union how Jimmy Dore talks about the Chicago Teachers Union and why he thinks the Omicron, the predominant COVID variant, is not a threat to children. The crew finds it despicable. They find it despicable that Jimmy Dore shows no concern of long COVID in children, but rather that long-term social implications of being out of school for the first 2 weeks of January.
The whole crew found it despicable?
The whole crew.
Even Geico Caveman and Dingbat?
So right, yes. So even Geico Caveman and Dingbat.
Wow.
So that's right, folks. Agreeing with the CDC, which is what I just showed you I did in my video, agreeing with the CDC now qualifies you to be a psycho according to the Minority Report.
Full psycho.
Loaded,
not just a regular psycho like Dingbat. You're a full psycho.
And they're loaded with all the words you're supposed to be programmed with, like despicable and psycho, and everything else that their handlers gave them to say about me.
They're not fully in disbelief, but somewhat, yeah, that's despicable.
So these guys make a living off of ripping me, right? That's their whole thing, and they're lying to you on top of it all the time.
Well,
and just like
tell them they're welcome.
Just like Kyle Kalinske, just like Crystal, just like TYT, just like MSNBC, CNN, they all lied to you, and they were repeating big pharma and corporate news talking points to smear actual lefties. So these are the Sean Hannitys of YouTube. They are not lefties.
They're not as successful as Sean Hannity. Don't give the wrong
believe
impression.
me. Here's another one. Jimmy Dore is screaming about Chicago teachers unions voting against in-person learning during COVID surge, being fear-mongered, because they were, by big pharma, mainstream corporate media, because they were. Now even the New York Times, 4 years later, agrees with me. Which is the opposite of how a mainstream media covered this. But
look at the Ukraine flag.
Yeah, yes, of course. But Dore's a friend of workers, everyone. So that was the smear that Jimmy Dore turns on worker. He's all lying. He doesn't give a shit about workers. He doesn't give a shit about union. No, I give a shit about the truth.
Vernarial Jorgie said that?
And by the way, you see this tweet? They deleted that tweet.
Yeah.
I didn't delete my tweet. They deleted their tweet. So here we go. He goes, according to Dore, schools are safe because Sweden once kept them open in spring. It's not spring. There's a COVID surge and a ton of teachers are sick or self-isolating, not to mention kids may be exposed to some long-term effects of COVID. So all that was garbage. Hey. That was based on, there was never any science to back up any of that. That's all just people screaming propaganda from big pharma and big pharma funded corporate media. That's all that is. There was never any data. Just like we showed you in the New York Times article, now the experts say, hey, we hope in the future we'll follow the data. Because they didn't follow it this time. The people who said they were following the science and told you not to do your own research and not to look into it, they were the ones who were repeating lies. And that's why they didn't want you to look into it, because you would find out they were fucking lying. And you got ass swipes from all stripes. People with MSNBC contracts, people who get money from Disney and like the Young Turks. What was that guy's name? Jeffrey Katzenberg gave him the $20 million. And they sell their email list to the Democratic Party. That's what the TYT does. They sell you out to the Democratic Party. That's who that is. These are their Kyle Kalinskis. Oh no, now he's even going against teacher unions. That was what people were saying about me all the time on social media and in YouTube videos. Jimmy Dore's now going against the teachers union. Jimmy Dore was speaking up for the truth. And there's lots of teachers who knew the truth and they knew their union leaders were lying to them.
Don't tell the truth that helps the bad guys.
Albeit his wife is a teacher, and I assume a union member. Not only was Steph a union member, she was a union leader. Steph was a union leader, and we're strong supporters of teacher unions. We are skeptical of teacher union leaders who are corrupt, like Randy Weingarten and the people who were running the Chicago Teachers Union at that time.
Corruption in Chicago. I won't hear
He's really gone off the deep end. How many times have we heard that about? Yeah. Oh, Jimmy's really gone off the deep end.
Is there any bottom to this deep end?
He seems to be looking for a conspiracy where one doesn't exist. Corporate media has been railing against distance learning and the Chicago's teachers union. Why doesn't he just come out and admit he's anti-union?
Are these paid? Look, are these paid for real?
I think these have to.
This is Brooklyn Dad Defiant style horseshit.
That's what it seems like to me.
Because, dude, no. I mean, there are people that brain damage that will say that, but it's not that many, dude. And they were paying a lot of people to do this at the time. They still pay people to do that. I'll show you the ads Rogan sent me of a friend of his got to promote messages.
Oh, really? Hold on. I'd like to see it. Here's another one. Here's someone who was, this is my favorite idiot. So one of my favorite idiots on Twitter. Chaotic leftist. You're not leftist. You are a right-wing dupe of big pharma and corporate media.
That's not how you spell chaotic either.
Your guy's cult daddy, that's what she refers to me as,
cult daddy,
isn't even trying to pretend anymore. You mean because I'm getting COVID right? And you're repeating right-wing talking points?
You know, this is rooted in misogyny for those 3 fine reporters from the New York Times who figured it out 4 years after the fact.
I think she's got a part in this new Discovery Channel nature series called When Stupid People Try Being Clever.
Well, I mean, come on, it's Twitter.
Here's some more. He needs a milkshake thrown at his ass.
So that's, you done pissed off Antifa.
So that's somebody saying that there should be violence against me, according to them.
Look at the Palestinian flags. This is before the big woke breakup of October 7th.
This is before the big...
They're not friends no more, these people.
So this person says he's an effing con man, nothing more. Except he's right. And you're a right-wing moron.
Hey, when you're shallow,
Jimmy
every end is the deep end.
Jimmy, by the way, I don't even like saying that. Right, the right wing, left wing doesn't mean anything anymore. So
it's like saying woman.
Erase that.
Who knows what the fuck?
Who knows what it means? Jimmy is a friend of whatever gets him the most. This is from some gutter dandy. Never people who don't put their real names.
Is that his real picture, at least?
Jimmy is a friend of whatever gets him the most clicks and cash to pay for his new compound in the Hollywood Hills. First of all, I don't live in the Hollywood.
Most clicks and cash is to spout like stupid Destiny streamer, center left, Junior Bill Maher midget politics. That's what makes you the real money. Not saying anything, not going against your own supposed side. That's not what makes you money. It makes you a lot of enemies.
Here's another one. Empire TV. The Empire TV says Jimmy Dore shits on the Chicago Teachers Union for previously voting to end in-person learning. By the way, I didn't shit on them. I said they were being fear-mongered and they were believing the propaganda.
Stop shitting.
So stop shitting. Stop telling the truth about the Chicago Teachers
Empire
Union
TV?
Who are harming children. Jimmy Dore shits on Chicago. Do you see how they do this?
Well, this is professional.
Jimmy Dore shits on Chicago Teachers Union for previously voting to end in-person learning due to the worsening COVID-19 pandemic while simultaneously referring to the Omicron variant as the Omicron cold. Turns out I was right. 1,000%. And all I was doing was following the actual CDC data on this, which these assholes are too lazy to even look up.
And now their kids are slow. I'm kidding. They don't have kids. These are barren men and women.
Colin O'Malley says, how can you say Dore has anything to do with the left politics? Why? Because I don't go along with censorship, I don't go along with war, and I don't go along with authoritarian big pharma propaganda.
Who's he? He's familiar.
He downplays COVID, says it hardly affects kids, because it doesn't. And we knew it didn't. And where did you get your information from, Colin? You got it straight from Dr. Fauci, did you? Did you get it straight from Pfizer?
Did you
get it straight from Rachel Maddow? You get it straight from The Intercept and Ken Klipperstein? Because that's what it sounds like. His defense of Rittenhouse should also be a big red flag. You mean I told the truth about what happened?
That is a red flag. You told the truth.
I told the truth about it.
How'd that turn out, moron? That's a big one. The Rittenhouse thing.
Yeah.
If you
believe
watch the goddamn footage, you dip.
And they won't.
Oh,
there's people who work for this show would refuse to watch the video, or Matt Orfala's video that debunked what they were saying about the Kyle Rittenhouse. People who work for this show refused to watch it.
Okay, I watched
and
that.
Screamed at me about it.
Yeah, no, they
and still refused to watch it.
Shane Gillis apologized to me via text because I was right about that, because he was initially like, "Oh, he's going to jail." Oh, he was a man and apologized. Stupid. I'm glad you brought up his dumb name, Sam Cedar, because.
I didn't.
Unrelated.
I did. I don't know if you noticed. I didn't.
It was on there.
Okay. So, Cygnus X321. Jimmy Dore is lying about COVID to push children and teachers back into COVID-infested schools, enabling their parents to return to COVID-infested workplaces to continue profit extraction that keeps the Dow elevated. Wall Street CEOs leap for joy when they hear Jimmy Dore repeat their propaganda.
Is pharma not on the Dow? Is it not part of the Dow investments?
I guess not.
The biggest money they've ever had returned on them. Profit extraction. That's amazing. What's the big profiting of
There's another one. Jimmy Dore going off on Chicago teacher union locals push to increase COVID safety in schools. No, they weren't pushing to increase COVID safety. They wanted to shut down schools. That is nothing to do with safety. That's harming children. I was actually sticking up for children, and you weren't, Eric. You were actually damaging children. You were advocating against children.
And getting over 37 likes, or exactly 37 likes.
He pulls a quote from a 2-week-old story from one doctor saying there isn't an increase. I was quoting the CDC in most of that report. He pulls a quote from the 2-week-old story from one doctor saying there isn't it's 2 weeks old. What? Saying that there isn't an increase in his hospital. The story is literally titled "Child COVID Hospitalizations Are Up, Especially in 5 States." You know why that was from NBC News. You know why it was titled that? Because NBC News was fear-mongering you. And I was taking their own report and showing you that their headline is false and bogus. That's what I was doing.
Were they holding up gunshot victims, though? That's probably what it was.
Here's some place called, this is a Twitter handle called the New York Times Breaking News. Let's look at Jimmy Dore's latest progressive left content, shall we? New York Times versus Project Veritas. Project Veritas was right. Bill Gates media scam. Bill Gates is running a media scam. In case you don't know. So now you're defending billionaires, monopolists. Booster forces school closings. That's what happened. I reported it. You don't like the truth is so more COVID authoritarianism. But sure, explain to me how Jimmy Dore is the true leftist.
There's not even any reactions.
First of all, it's got nothing to do with left or right. It's got to do with the truth.
Well, you see what that is, though. It's like a marketing thing. It's like a labeling thing. So they go, oh, his progressive left content. That's pure, like, this is mislabeled, because if you're on brand, you're saying the opposite of these things. A true leftist, I mean, that's crazy how deeply entrenched that is in branding.
Yes.
And then making it a left. I thought if you were leftist, you wouldn't be worried about that.
If you were leftist, you wouldn't be repeating Big Pharma propaganda. But that's what New York Times Breaking News is doing. That you're repeating Big Pharma propaganda and corporate news propaganda. And you're repeating propaganda from the corporate captured regulatory agencies. Another one from Cygnus X321.
That's great.
He's the same Jimmy Dore who pushes the Bannon-Pompeo Wuhan lab conspiracy. It never ended. There wasn't a lie these people didn't completely ingest and then spit out. The virus came from the Wuhan lab. I don't know if you noticed. Who defends Rittenhouse aligned boogs? Okay, I guess Boogaloo Boys.
Rittenhouse was right.
I wasn't defending Rittenhouse. I was defending the truth.
Just look at the footage.
Why aren't you pissed off that the corporate media lied to you about a 16-year-old lifeguard to divide the country? That's the real question. So again, these people are the ones saying I'm not left, but what they're doing is defending the establishment political organization of the Democratic Party, and they're defending the establishment corporate news. That's what they're doing. Okay. Who smeared the most read socialist website in the world as CIA?
What's that?
They are. That's because they are. I think it's the World Socialist website. I'm not sure. I forget the one. Whatever one it was, they're infiltrated by the CIA. 100%. Who has uttered one word of opposition as government mandates kids to return to COVID-infested schools? I was for them going back to school, and I was right.
This is a fake.
This is a mental.
This isn't like a real. I don't believe these, other than a couple of wingnuts and then
So there you have it.
Woody Allen glasses.
So
show.
New York Times. It takes them 4 years. They finally come around, and guess what? Now they're agreeing with Jimmy Dore. And all those people have been smearing me nonstop. I was right about masks. I was right about the vax. I was right about transmission, contraction, lockdowns.
I don't like it, honestly.
I was right about natural immunity. I was right about herd immunity. I was right about school closures.
You're right about Amber Herd immunity.
So, and everybody now who has trashed my reputation, has slandered me on social media, people I've known, people have been on the show. Because I can forgive them for being wrong about COVID, but they'll never forgive me for being right about COVID.
Well, they'll lose sponsors.
Ever, because that takes integrity. And guys like Cornel West couldn't give a shit about COVID. Hey, 41% of black businesses are wiped out, never coming back because of COVID lockdowns. Cornel West, who gives a fuck?
He treated it like his own child support payments.
He treated it like his own child support payments. Hey, 70,000 workers, healthcare workers in one state alone got fired because they wouldn't take a mandated experimental vaccine. Cornel West, no big deal. Those people claim to stick up for workers. They claim to stick up for kids. They don't give a fuck. They'll do it when it's easy. That's what Cornel West does. When it's easy. When it's hard, he tucks his tail and runs and calls people like me white supremacists. Hey, come see us do a live stand-up show. We're going to be in Stockholm, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, London, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Edmonton, Alberta, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Denver, Colorado. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.